And joining us now on the debate in the nation's capital, Mirko Bibic. He is Senior Vice President of Regulatory and Government Affairs with Bell Canada. And with us here in studio, George Berger, advisor with TechSavvy, that's an internet service provider. James Cowan, Deputy Editor with Canadian Business Magazine. And Donald Blair, independent IT and political consultant. As I welcome you gentlemen here in the studio, Mirko, nice to have you on the line from the nation's capital. Just want to remind everybody that you, our viewers, you're part of tonight's broadcast. That's why we call it Your Agenda on Thursdays. We want to remind you that fifth column blogger Mike Miner is hosting a live chat on our Inside Agenda blog. Go to tvo.org/theagenda, or you can pick us up on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/theagenda. And you can send us a tweet, twitter.com, #YourAgenda. Jump in, join the debate, and we'll get your comments up on the screen throughout the broadcast tonight. Okay, a little background just before we start here, and then we'll get everybody involved in this. And Michael, can we bring this graphics package up to start with? I suspect the three letters UBB were ones that people hadn't heard more than a couple of months ago. So what is usage-based billing? Well, it imposes a cap on how much an individual can download per month. Once that cap is exceeded, the individual must pay an additional fee per gigabyte downloaded. Most customers of the major internet service providers already have download caps in place, the vast majority in fact. The CRTC's ruling would allow major ISPs to impose caps on smaller ISPs who use their infrastructure. Okay, we're going to get into all of this tonight. Mirko, let's go to you first in Ottawa. Give us the case. Why is Bell in favor of UBB?
Well, good evening, Stephen. The issue for Bell is really a question of fundamental fairness for our internet subscribers. As you mentioned, the vast majority of internet subscribers, and certainly the vast majority of Bell internet subscribers, do pay on a usage-based billing basis. One point of clarification, however, is if we offer several packages. We offer packages designed for the light users, the medium users, and the heavy users, and depending on your usage patterns, you can choose the initial package you want. You get a very generous amount of internet usage time with our packages. Now, if you go over your amount of allotted usage time, which is, as I said, generous, there are ways with Bell that you can purchase for $5 more. You can purchase about 200 hours more of online viewing. For $15, 600 more hours of online viewing, roughly speaking. So you can buy a generous amount of additional bandwidth. And the question is one of fairness. The absolutely heaviest internet users right now are the end users that use the services of third-party ISPs. Those users ride on our network just like our own subscribers, yet they're not paying on the same basis, and we think that's fundamentally unfair, and I'm sure that the 97% of people would agree.
We got one of them here, Mirko, and I want to find out what he says. First of all, TechSavvy. George, tell us what TechSavvy is.
TechSavvy is an independent internet service provider based in Chatham, Ontario. And the business of TechSavvy is essentially to provide retail internet service to its customers.
Is it big?
It's big, not by compared to BCE, but we're growing. We have about 130 employees, and we have 3 offices in Chatham, Ontario, Toronto, and Sudbury.
How many subscribers?
I can tell you about 67,000 subscribers for internet.
So that's a long way from Bell Canada, but it's not bad.
It's a very long way, and if you put it in the big picture, I hardly think that we're giving them too much trouble in real terms.
So why are they concerned about you?
I think they're really concerned because we're really in place to provide some kind of a competitive environment in a market that's dominated by a duopoly, essentially telecom and cable. And without that, there would be severe pricing pressure in providing products. What we do is we're kind of a reality check. We say, look, these are the prices that you could be paying if you had an option, if you were choosing to take your service from outside of the duopoly. What's going on now is the desire on the part of the duopoly, in particular Bell, to impose their pricing structure on us.
It's their information highway, though. You're using their roads.
That's right, and we're paying for it. We're paying for it under tariffs that were set up under Phase 2, and like any other regulated service, any other regulated industry, there's a legitimate tariff structure, and we pay for what we use. We pay 100% of what we use.
Donald, what's at stake for consumers here?
I think the biggest issue, for starters, is Canada's internet usage. There are about 30,000, according to Bell, about 30,000 customers that are going to be affected by this. Frankly, if Bell is really hurting in the pocketbook and needs to go after 30,000 internet users in order to beef up its bank account, I think that's an issue. The biggest concern that I have for consumers is the fact that today everything that we do in some way or another is connected to the internet. Whether we use telephones, voice over IP phones, or even security systems. Me, for example, I like to watch a lot of my programming online, and I think that that's where the issue is. Everything that we do today is done over the internet, and there's an increasing amount of demand for bandwidth.
So just tell me this, the shows that you watch, how do you get them?
I usually stream them through broadcasters' websites. So, for example, TVO broadcasts a lot of its programming online through podcasts or streaming. CTV is another perfect example, and I think that of many of the concerns I have over UBB, that's one of the biggest concerns I have. Bell is in the process right now of buying the CTV television network, which broadcasts a lot of its programming online. It seems to me a little hypocritical that Bell would go after Tier 2 internet service providers because of the demand on their infrastructure, much of which was set up in place when it was the only game in town, and a lot of the dollars to set up that infrastructure came from federal dollars, taxpayer dollars.
Okay, you've introduced a whole bunch of ideas here. James, stand by for a sec, because I want to give Mirko a chance to respond to some of the issues you've raised here, okay? He's raised the issue of you put your information highway in place, or a significant chunk of it, when you had a monopoly. He's also saying that it's not good for consumers at the end of the day if there's not this kind of extra choice or extra bit of competition in the marketplace. Mirko, why don't I give you a chance to respond to that?
Okay, I'll respond to those two issues, Steve. So number one, this notion that these are monopoly dollars is, and I say this with respect, but we're in 2011, it's a ridiculous notion. The networks, the internet networks that we've built, these next generation fiber internet networks that we've built have been built in the last 4 or 5 years with billions of dollars of capital. It's a completely new overlay network, meaning brand new network. It has nothing to do with a bygone era when Bell was the only provider of traditional telephone service. So I think that one we can put to rest. Now, in terms of the consumer impacts, you know, the other panelists mentioned liking, you know, watching TV, TVO online and web streaming. Again, like I said at the very beginning, for $15 you can get about 600 hours of that kind of viewing. That's can't do the quick math here, or not quickly enough, but I think that's probably every single hour of the day for the whole 30 days of a month for $15. So let's put it into perspective here. At the end of the day, the wholesale users we're talking about here use on average double the capacity a month that regular users on the Bell network use, and they should pay the same way.
James, let's just get a better sense of the numbers here, because you know a lot of people are treating this as if it's a sign the apocalypse is upon us, but then I hear, you know, estimates that this is going to affect a whopping, 4 or 5% of the people who are using the internet today, which doesn't sound like the apocalypse is upon us. What's the truth here?
My understanding is that as we're looking at it right now, it's about, as you say, low or high single digits, low double digits in terms of the people who are actually going to be affected by this. Of course, the argument to be made is that the folks who are light users today, as more of us start to watch our cable online, as more of us start to watch our television, as more of us start to live chat, as more of us start to move our telephone service, that usage is all going to go up. Now, some might argue that that's a move towards, a good argument to move towards unlimited pricing. It also seems to me that it's a good argument that since we're in the infancy of this, it's time to get sort of the economic fundamentals right, to get the actual system as a whole right. And in fact, it might be worth looking at this notion of usage-based billing, perhaps not in the exact configurations that we're seeing it right now, but the fundamental principle of paying for what you use seems to be a fairly sound one to start from.
Okay, George, let's get you to comment on that if we can. If you use more, you should pay more. That seems pretty simple.
All right, but how much do you think a gigabyte costs?
Pennies.
Pennies, exactly pennies. So can you tell me why incremental gigabytes should cost $2? Okay, it's a rhetorical question. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
The entire stated purpose of this whole exercise on UBB is in order to actually constrain internet usage, which is quite remarkable when you consider the only other 2 countries in the world I know who do that are Iran and Egypt. So I'm not sure we necessarily want to be in that company in this regard. It's the stated purpose by the CRTC, and it's the stated purpose of Bell. And I should tell you that the CRTC essentially adopted Bell's entire approach to this matter.
You think the underlying philosophy here is to make sure Canadians use the internet less?
Absolutely. It's a punitive, it's a consumption tax. You can't call it anything else. When the underlying cost of the goods is pennies and you're charging $2 for it, I don't see how you can call it anything else.
James?
There's a difference between a consumption tax and a sin tax. If you're creating a sin tax and trying to stop people from doing something that's bad for them, then that's one thing. But a consumption tax makes perfect sense. And if you look across other industries, other places, people now, we're going towards smart metering with electricity where people are charged more precisely for what they use. City of Toronto is doing the same thing with garbage collection. Going all the way back to something like long distance telephone use. It's always been a fundamental principle in all of these areas that you get charged for what you use.
So are you suggesting this is a sin tax or a consumption tax?
I think it's a consumption tax or it's a consumption charge, and that would make sense.
It's not a tax because government's not levying it.
Exactly.
All right, but what
Donald,
are you consuming?
Let me, I got to hear from Donald for a second.
Yeah, but this is, I think, the major issue here. I'm a heavy internet user just by the nature of what I do for a living. Am I now all of a sudden going to be penalized because this is what I do for a living? I am always connected to the internet. I watch a lot of programming online in the evening, but during the day I'm downloading a lot of applications and installers for servers or other things that I'm building. Other parts of my job require the use of internet and of internet access. To call it a consumption tax and then to make the parallel to any other utility, I don't think quite adds up. Part of the issue I also have with the idea of a levy of any kind is the fairness of it, of the charge. You made a great point that gigabytes really only cost pennies. Why then the upsell? Why does Bell need to charge that much more?
Let me go to Mirko on some of the issues here.
That's what I'm really curious to know. Okay. I'd like to get an answer to that.
Let me go to Mirko. I guess there's two different analogies, Mirko, that I keep hearing. One is that if you use more, you ought to pay more. The other is, you know, if you're making local telephone calls on your Bell service, you can be on the phone 24/7 and it's not going to cost you any more, right? As long as you're making local calls, it doesn't matter how much you want to talk. Which analogy makes more sense here?
Well, clearly, paying more if you use more is not an analogy. It's just the fairest pricing principle there is. As far as the home telephone, the traditional home telephone analogy, that you just have to scratch a little bit below the surface, and that analogy completely falls apart. And here's why: in the traditional telephone world, a voice call is a voice call, and it takes exactly the same capacity. So, Steve, if I call you and I spend 30 minutes on the phone with you, it uses exactly the same amount of capacity as if I call George and spend 30 minutes on the phone with him. There's no capacity issue there. And you build your telephone network just like you build your internet network to accommodate the peak. And it's fairly easy to predict the peak times of a traditional telephone calling. And you accommodate that, and there is no wild growth in demand for that. In fact, it's falling. Whereas with the internet, growth is exploding year over year, and we race to catch up with it. In fact, last quarter, we spent $860 million in 3 months alone, Bell, to keep up with capacity consumption growth. And so, just to finish the point on the analogy, Steve, if you spend 30 minutes just browsing articles online, you will use far less capacity than if George spends 30 minutes online downloading HD movies. So that's the fundamental difference. The analogy just doesn't hold.
Okay, George wants in here.
And so the pricing can't be the same.
George wants in, and then James.
I agree with Mirko. We have to start scratching surfaces, and I think we should start scratching the surface of some of Bell's arguments. The fact of the matter is that when you're talking about a gas consumption tax or an electricity usage tax, the fact of the matter is these are non-renewable resources, where in the case of electricity, they cost money to make. In this case, we're not actually consuming anything. The entire cost of that object or thing or asset that we get on our TV, on our computer screens is actually created by you, by doing the show, or by somebody who's writing an email, or by somebody who's writing a book.
No, but none of your consumers can see it unless they go on the highway that Mirko's company paid to build.
But that's exactly right. But then that's the same thing with oil. When you're transporting oil, you've got the transport costs, but you've also got the oil costs. Here, you've only got the transport costs. And those transport costs are a fixed cost. And that's exactly what we, as wholesalers, pay for. It's part of a tariff. We pay our share, and that's what it's based on. If, in fact, congestion should someday, and it's questionable whether there is congestion, but if it should get to the point where you need to expand capacity, then we revisit the tariffs, we pay more, and we pay our fair share.
But we're not there yet.
And we build out the infrastructure.
Steve, could I jump in on that one?
Go, Mirko, yes.
Okay, thank. I just want to respond because it's a couple of times now people have said that building extra capacity costs pennies. So first of all, if it's really so...
No, he didn't say pennies. He said they'd revisit it if they had to.
No, but before it was how much does it cost for extra capacity, and pennies was thrown out.
Okay.
So if it really costs pennies to build a network, obviously, we wouldn't be having this debate. As I mentioned, $860 million built on increasing capacity in the last 3 months alone. And let's take a step back. To argue that it costs pennies to build incremental capacity, it just wishes away the fact that you had to have, there's engineering costs, there's network construction costs, there's equipment costs, there's ditch digging costs, there's employee costs. All those fixed and sunk costs have to be recovered somehow, and we recover them in a way that generates a return and allows for more investment so that we can keep pace with the growth. And the best way to do that is to ensure that the absolute heaviest users, and I don't see how this is so controversial, the absolutely heaviest users should pay in exactly the same way as the 98% of other users. It's not that they should pay in any different way. That's not what we're suggesting. They should just pay exactly the same way.
Okay,
and what's
George,
wrong with that?
Quick intervention, George, and then James.
All right, well, first of all, I did not say that building out capacity costs pennies. We all know that it costs a lot of money, but I will say this. A week and a half ago, you said that the capex that Bell spends on internet infrastructure was $6 billion. Then on Tuesday, you said it was $8 billion, and this morning in the Globe and Mail, you said it was $10 billion. I can tell you right now, I'll help you out here. In the last 3 years, Bell spent $9 billion on capex. About $3 million each year. It's actually going down in absolute dollars, and it's definitely going down in terms of percentage of revenues. So let's get that straight. And in addition, you will not break out which portion of that totality you actually spend on networks. So the entire global amount that you spend over the last 3 years is $9 billion. Please feel free to tell us which portion of that goes to build out networks. And then we can discuss how much of that we should bear.
James.
Okay, so there was a wireless network built in 2009 for about $1 billion, and the vast majority of those $9 billion was on networks.
Asked and answered. Next.
Well, and I think this gets to an interesting point in that what we've been talking about a lot is this notion that people are paying too much for their internet service right now. And that doesn't directly link to usage-based billing. If you are concerned about the cost of your internet right now, then you should be addressing the cost of pricing and those sorts of things. Because Bell is not a dumb company. Bell is very good at making money. In the event that they can impose these usage-based billing services, what they're going to do is raise the costs for everybody, and that will trickle down to the small providers as well, because the tariff is charged to how much Bell charges.
Okay, Mike Miner, stand by. I'm going to come to you in just 1 minute, but I want Donald to have a shot at this. You know, whether it's $6 or $8 or $10 billion, we heard it now. It's the number is 9, but I mean it's billions of dollars that Bell has invested to build the infrastructure so that you can watch these shows that you like to watch online. They got to get that money back, right? They've invested the money. They're entitled to a return on that investment so that they can borrow more and build more. Is that not the case?
They do, Steve. They do get paid back quite considerably. The service that Bell sells out, wholesales to companies like TekSavvy, they pay a premium for every subscriber, and then I can't remember if it's a monthly or a yearly fee. I think it's monthly to the tune of like $10,000 or something to that extent. On top,
fees, that's right.
and a whole host of other fees. It's not as if Bell isn't getting its money back for allowing these wholesale providers to use their networks, to use their infrastructure. And granted, it is their infrastructure, and I wanted to raise a quick point on the cost of internet. Pardon me. The general average price that most people would spend on internet access is anywhere between $35 to $50 a month. At one point, I remember spending with Bell somewhere around $60 a month for internet access. It wasn't, pardon me, it wasn't limited. I had a 25 gig cap. We moved over to a tier 2 internet service provider where our service is unlimited. We pay considerably less, and that to me was fair. And it's competition, and it's a free market. And if you don't like paying the $40 or $50 or $60 or the extra $5 every gig that you go over, then you find another service provider that is in your budget. The fact that I have the freedom of that kind of choice is important to me as a consumer. If I don't have that freedom of choice, then I'm stuck either way, spending what Bell tells me I have to spend.
We are going to pursue this issue with perhaps one of the most important, historic Twitter exchanges that ever took place between a journalist and a cabinet minister in just 1 minute. But before we do that, Mike Miner is at an undisclosed location somewhere here at 2180 Yonge Street in the bowels of TVO. Are they whooping it up online about this one, Mike?
Oh, are they? There are hundreds of people chatting about this online, and you may not be surprised to learn that the type of people who watch the agenda online aren't really big fans of user-based billing. They're countering a lot of points that are being brought up in the interview tonight. One person wanted us to ask Mr. Bibick. Chris asked, does he think that UBB is unfairly targeting working families because you have a family with, say, 4 people and they have to pay more because they're using more than just a bachelor living in an apartment? But what you're hearing is really not a big picking apart of people's bills, the fact that they're going to be paying more themselves. What they want to see is a change in policy in Canada. Kingston student tweeted and said that we're not against UBB, we're against forcing a business model on third-party providers. They also have the solution for more capacity. Devin Baines translates it into internet speak. He says, "Weekend has competition, please." And Baloo says, in light of all the CRT decision, let's hope that Canada seizes the opportunity to change the way we use and pay for the internet. Why, oh why, do we put up with the closed market? Open it up now. And for the hundreds of people that are online, this is pretty typical of the sentiment that you're seeing on here.
Okay, Mike, thank you. Keep moderating the chat, and of course, time permitting, get back to us later if anything transpires in addition. I should, just before we go to this Twitter exchange for the ages, okay, Mirko, do you want to have a shot at that one comment that came out of Mike Miner's online chat there, namely that if you're in a big family and you've got lots of people using online, does this kind of unfairly hit them versus the single person living in their parents' basement who's not really not supporting anybody, et cetera, et cetera?
In fact, what I think will be unfair to that family of 4 is if you can't impose usage-based billing on the absolute heaviest users of the internet. That's what's going to be unfair. Again, to put things in perspective, fully half of the Bell internet users use only about 20% of the amount of usage we give them with actually a light plan, 25 gigabytes. So half of our users don't even use 20% of that 25 gigabyte allotment. So most users are well within their caps. What's going to happen is if you can't charge the absolute heaviest users on the basis of the amount they consume, the rather unfortunate result, I would fear down the road, is that everyone will have to pay more. And that's going to affect that family of 4 far more than probably what their current consumption is in relation to what the allotment is that we offer. So that's a question of actually billing fairness from our perspective.
Okay. I just noticed, incidentally, I don't know if you can see at the bottom of the screen there, they've got the sort of title of the program. It's called WTF is UBB. Okay, well, I think we all know what UBB stands for now. The Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, this is a family program. We're going to leave that to your imagination as to what that stands for. Okay, here we go. February 2nd, the very enterprising CBC reporter Rosemary Barton tweeted a question to the Industry Minister Tony Clement about UBB, and I'll tell you, Tony Clement, you can say whatever you want about him, he is very responsive on his Twitter account to people when they tweet him, and he tweeted out that the CRTC, he didn't like their decision, they've got to go back to the drawing board with their ruling, and then this Twitter palooza happened. Watch the monitors here in the studio, we're going to go through this. Andrew Coyne got involved in this and said this is the same easy run before the mob populism as on the Potash file. Why have usage-based phone bills or electricity? Which was a question that Tony Clement decided to respond to. He said this is about forcing a single business model on all competitors. I'm for market choice. I guess you're not. To which Andrew Coyne came back. You're for market choice? So open up the market to foreign competition. Crickets? Yeah, I thought not. To which Tony Clement came back. Funny, but I don't remember kudos from you after I allowed Global Live to compete. More crickets. Andrew Coyne, come on back in. So instead, you substitute your own business judgment for that of the industry, forcing upon them a business model. So ludicrously uneconomic that even the CRTC wouldn't go for it. That's some market choice to the left of the CRTC. Really? You're asked why you refuse to allow competition in one area, and your answer is that you were not adequately praised for another? Andrew can't spell. This is just the way he did it on Twitter. And, you know, sometimes there's short forms. Tony comes back. No, Andrew, my response was to illustrate the inconsistencies of your position. Once again, why allow CRTC to force only one business model? I stand up for consumers, Clement said. For consumers, creators, innovators, and entrepreneurs, that's worth all the brickbats you can throw at me. Now, this actually went on for quite a long time. That's just a small chunk of it there. But, Donald, I do want to ask you a question. First of all, we got to acknowledge, in this day and age, when politicians are so, you know, led around by a leash, and there's, you know, their handlers are so fearful about them saying anything without having it checked and vetted 8,000 times, I think you got to be very impressed that you got a minister here who had the guts to sort of engage with a guy who's a pretty smart journalist and, you know, has his views on this and is a pretty smart whippersnapper. Having said all that, you're a conservative. Yes. You're a small c conservative. And I want to know if that is kind of reflective of the discussion that small c conservatives are having all across the country on this issue.
It's interesting. I found it in two perspectives. There are a lot of, most conservatives are generally for free market competition, that kind of the spirit of competition. This exchange was quite interesting because I haven't quite seen it get that heated. It's not exactly a political issue. I don't think it's rather not a partisan issue for starters. We saw the NDP decide to hold a rally about a week ago on this issue. They were trying to take up the mantle on this. I don't think it's related to that. As far as within conservative circles, though, we all agree that the practice of UBB, usage-based billing, is unfair. Many of the conservatives I've spoken to, and some of the people from all sorts of parts of the political spectrum, agree that this is the CRTC overstepping its bounds. The bigger discussion isn't necessarily, especially in conservative circles, not the UBB issue, but more the reach that the CRTC has. That's where, especially in the conservative circles, that's what we're talking about. How far does the CRTC go with Global Live, with this decision? They weren't directly involved in the whole money for nothing fiasco, but even chiming in on that, where does the CRTC really fit in as far as respecting consumers and looking out for the best interest of consumers? We don't see that. Okay, James, tell me, I mean, if you were a conservative, which is the truly genuine, more conservative position on this one? The one enunciated by Coyne or by Clement?
I would say Andrew Coyne actually had it right on this one. In terms of, if you're looking for a clear free market alternative to what's going on, then the alternative is to open up the market in general, allow for foreign investment to come in this area, and that will stimulate the kind of competition that you really need to do things like lower prices. What we're looking at right now is an artificially created competition, because all of the smaller internet service providers are all creatures of the CRTC regulation. The CRTC regulation is what allows them to survive. So at the whims of a government or of the CRTC, they can come and go and their business models can be adversely affected. If we were to open it up and have free and open competition and push forward in that way, then you'd actually see a realistic pricing structure. So it kind of sounds like you're talking to a kooky bunch of conservatives, if that's what they're pushing for.
Let me find out what Mirko thinks on this. The notion, as Andrew Coyne said, of just opening it all up, international competition as well. How would Bell view that?
Well, that's a big topic. I think one of the issues with the foreign ownership issue is that, of course, what's been under debate in the last year or year and a half on foreign ownership is to potentially lift the foreign ownership rules only on the telecom side. But of course, we now operate in an integrated communications market where telecom and broadcasting is offered over the same networks, over the same pipes, so to speak. And you know, how do you lift foreign ownership rules on telecom but not touch broadcasting? broadcasting, and then there's a whole cultural issue that gets brought into the broadcasting debate. It's very complex. So, I mean, that's what the government's got to grapple with. On the UBB issue in particular, though, what I would point out is, you know, this, and again, it's a narrow issue of whether or not UBB is an appropriate pricing principle for a small segment of the wholesale market. That's what the issue is. And on that issue, the CRTC had involved due process. It was a 2-year process where they took in submissions from every interested stakeholder and arrived at a considered decision. Now, of course, people can reasonably disagree with the CRTC decision, and that's fine. And there is an ability to appeal to the federal government. But if that's going to be the case, then due process ought to be followed there as well, and people ought to be given an opportunity to provide their fully considered views before a decision is made. So I think I would, on that issue, I would just say that ultimately, you know, whatever happens, there needs to be due process, and I think that's what's going to happen now with the CRTC taking the issue back.
Let me ask the two ISP guys here today. George, have you guys met with Tony Clement? I mean, he seems to be on your side on this one. Have you had a meeting with him?
We have not met with him.
You've not met with him? No. Mirko, has Bell Canada had a meeting with Tony Clement on this?
No, we have not.
Have you sought one?
We did.
And?
We have not had a meeting yet.
Is he declining to meet with you?
Well, I'll just leave it at, you know, again, there's due process. The CRTC is looking at it. So right now we're going to put our arguments forward in the CRTC arena. And that's what that was. You know, Mr. von Finkenstein, the chairman, decided to look at it again, and we're going to make our best arguments there.
Okay, here's where I go to James, because this is not the first time the Harper government has overruled the CRTC. It's actually not the first time any government has overruled the CRTC on some issue related to, you know, broadcasting or telecom or ISPs, that kind of thing. The Global Live decision is out there. The VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol decision, is out there as well. Look down the road for us. What do you think the long-term consequences of CRTC decisions, you know, on what seems to be a relatively, you know, frequent basis now, being turned over by the government of the day?
It's uncertainty, and that's the worst thing you can have in any market, is to have these people coming forward and changing decisions, and no business knowing at any given moment what rules it's actually playing by. If either the CRTC or the government of the day can flip things over, change things around, and we've got this ping-ponging effect going back and forth right now between the two sides. It's uncertainty. I think what this points to is that we need to open it up to a bigger, more difficult debate in terms of what our telecom policy is going to be going forward, because I think everybody can agree, regardless of what your view on UBB is right now, that the system as a whole isn't working, and nobody's sure what the rules are.
Should we get rid of the CRTC altogether in this day and age? Does it serve a function anymore?
I think we need to know exactly what that function is, and that's the role of the government to define. And rather than making ad hoc one-off decisions, announcing policy positions on Twitter, you know, and I give Mr. Clement a lot of credit for being available on Twitter and chatting, but perhaps that's not the best forum for public debate. The best place for public debate is in the House of Commons, and we haven't had this debate in the House of Commons yet.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit there. The House of Commons is a great place to have a public debate. I don't disagree with you there, but gosh, don't say anything that's going to make them stop tweeting and being more accessible and you know, kind of. Anyway, that's an aside.
Well, and I also think that there's some kind of value to that too, that Clement is available, and it speaks again to consumers and speaking in the best interest of consumers. He's broadcasting this decision or an opinion on Twitter, fine. But what it ultimately boils down to, and you asked a very interesting question, should the CRTC be abolished? I don't think it needs to be abolished. I think that there needs to be a serious discussion on reform, because I do think the CRTC serves somewhere down the line a real, serious, good purpose.
Okay, Don, I'm going to chime in here because we got a few minutes left, and I've got a couple more things I want to tackle. How much? 4 minutes left. Thank you. Michael, do me a favor. Bring that one up again, okay? There was that comment that we got from, this is Kingston student via the live chat. So you should ask the question on the cap discrepancy. Mirko, I'm going to ask you this question. He says it's 25 gigabytes in Ontario and 60 gigabytes in Quebec. Why the discrepancy on the cap? Can you help us with that?
Well, hold on. We have a number of packages in both Ontario and Quebec. So we have a 25 gigabyte package, 50 and 75. And in Quebec, I think it ranges from 25 or 50 all the way up to 100. So in Ontario or in Quebec, there are plans there for the light, the medium, and the heavy user. Now, of course, we operate in both provinces, and we face a multiple number of competitors. In Ontario, we face competition from Rogers and Cogeco, two major cable companies, the Tech Savvies and other third-party wholesale ISPs like that, and a number of wireless providers. And by the way, today, wireless is a very robust alternative for broadband or internet services. In Quebec, we face a different set of competitors. We have Videotron. Everybody knows Videotron, a very formidable cable company. We have Cogeco, also a big cable company.
Okay, so there are
and
different
so we
market
have to react
conditions
to
in
the different
provinces.
marketplace. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay, I get that. All right, let's do one last thing here, because literally down to our last couple of minutes. More than 420,000 people have signed the quote-unquote Stop the Metered Internet petition. This is online. Even though, as we've already discovered here today, there are going to be relatively few Canadians, relatively few, who are going to be affected by this decision. I want to know, James, whether or not you think a lot of this foofara is just because, you know, for the longest time, it's kind of been fashionable not to like Rogers and not to like Bell.
I think it's a little bit of that, and I think it is regardless of who your provider is. You look at your bill at the end of the month, and particularly with bundling services where you've now got your cable, your television, your telephone all coming in on the same bill, there is a sticker shock effect. And I think the debate over UBB is people wanting to get action on that sticker shock. It might be misplaced in terms of the best way of solving that problem. But yeah, certainly it is a consumer's reaction to the pricing.
George, can I get you on that one? It's just, you know, there's long-time antipathy to Rogers and Bell for a whole bunch of reasons. Do you think that's part of this drama?
Well, I think that the discrepancy between what they want to charge for incremental gigabytes and the actual cost of it makes the public feel like they're getting mugged. I also think that the public is getting increasingly concerned about this remarkable concentration among very few companies of not just the content delivery systems, but also content itself. So you can't look at this in isolation from Bell acquiring CTV or Shaw acquiring CanWest and so on. Because of this, Bell has a very, very strong interest in trying to keep us away from the internet. Because from the internet, we get Netflix. And on Netflix, you get all-you-can-eat movies for $7 a month, whereas you have to go on Bell to get a VOD movie download for $9 a movie, $8 a movie, $7 a movie.
Okay, let me leave Mirko to the last 20 seconds to respond to that.
Well, I'd like to respond to the Stop the Meter campaign, Steve. I just urge everyone to look at the question. Of course, the question is loaded. It says basically the equivalent of, you know, CRTC is going to force you to pay more. You know, are you in support of that? Well, of course, people are going to say no, we're not in support, but that's not really the issue. That's not what the CRTC is doing at all. I'm sure if I were to ask the question, are you prepared to pay more to subsidize the heaviest users on the internet? I'm sure people would say no to that too.
Gotcha. Okay. Mirko Bibic, thanks so much for being there for us tonight in Ottawa on the line representing Bell Canada. Appreciate you coming into our studios in the nation's capital tonight. Here in the studio, George Burger from Tech Savvy, James Cowan from Canadian Business, Donald Blair, the IT and political consultant. Good of all you gentlemen to join us here in Toronto as well. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.